So many wars are not fought by talking, talking, talking. There are wars which you achieve by silence. Samantha had always been the picture of strength. On the outside, she was the kind of woman everyone admired, graceful, intelligent, compassionate, and fiercely independent. Her family and friends saw her as a beacon of resilience, always willing to lead a helping hand or offer a listening ear. But behind closed doors, Samantha's life was nothing like the image she presented. Her husband James had once been her soulmate. They had met in college, and what began as whirlwind romance blossomed into a marriage that seemed to promise everything. But over the years, something happened and shifted. James, once kind and supportive, began to change in ways Samantha couldn't explain. It wasn't an obvious transformation at first, but the crack in their relationship grew wider with each passing day. At first, it was small things. He would make little jokes about her appearance, which she would laugh off, thinking they were just playful banter. Then it would dismiss her opinion during discussion, making her feel insignificant. Slowly, James' treatment of her became more controlling. He would criticize her for spending time with friends or pursuing passion outside their home, calling it selfish. Samantha began to second guess herself, wondering if perhaps she was just being oversensitive. Subtle emotional manipulation had begun, but it wasn't just James who began to undermine her. Her family, his parents, particularly his mother, had a subtle yet suffocating influence over their relationship. They always favored James, often criticizing Samantha for not being good enough in their eyes. She wasn't as perfect as his mother wanted her to be. His father would make cutting remarks about her cooking or housekeeping. Over time, it became clear that James was aligning himself with his family's opinion, even if it meant tearing down the woman he once loved. Samantha felt isolated and trapped. The emotional weight of it all began to break her spirit, and she started doubting her worth. She lost confidence in her appearance, in her abilities, and in her decision. Each day felt like a quiet battle where the voices of James and his family echoed in her head, telling her she was never enough. One day, as Samantha stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, she couldn't recognize the woman looking back. She was hollowed lost, a shadow of who she was had once been. But then something stared deep into her, an ember of courage that had been smoldering beneath the surface. She realized that the life was she was living was not hers. It was a life sharpened by others' expectation. A life where her dreams, her desires, and her identity had been suppressed far too long. It was in that moment that Samantha made a choice. She would no longer allow herself to be diminished by James or his family. It wouldn't be easy, and she knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but she was determined to reclaim her voice. The first step was acknowledging the truth. Samantha confided in a close friend, someone who had always been a safe space for her. Through tears, she spoke of the emotional abuse she had been enduring. Her friend listened patiently and reassured her that she was not crazy or weak for feeling this way. This conversation was the catalyst Samantha needed to begin the long journey towards healing. The following week were challenging. She sought therapy where she learned about emotional abuse and the subtle ways in which it could destroy a person's sense of self. The section gave her the tools to confront her fears and insecurities. Slowly, she began to see the pattern in her relationship with James and his family that had kept her trapped for so long. Samantha also began discovering the passion that had once brought her joy. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. She took long walk in the park, letting the fresh air clear her mind. She reconnected with friends she had distanced herself from and began to rebuild the support system that had always been there for her. One evening, after months of soul searching, Samantha sat down with James, her heart raised as she spoke the word she had been rehearsing in her mind. She told him that she could no longer live in a marriage where she felt invisible and unworthy. She explained that his actions and those of his family had deeply wounded her. She needed to find her own path, one that wasn't shaped by their expectation. James, for the first time in years, seemed to listen, though his reaction was a mix of anger and denial. He refused to take full responsibilities for his behaviors, insisting that Samantha was overreacting. But Samantha, no longer afraid to stand her ground, calmly and firmly told him that she couldn't live in the shadow any longer. She had to let go for the sake of her own well being. The separation was painful. For a long time, Samantha grappled with guilt, questioning if she was making the right choice. But as time passed, the weight that had once crushed her began to lift. She realizes that by choosing herself, she had chosen the possibility of a future filled with self respect, love, and peace. Years later, Samantha stood in front of that same mirror. She was different now, stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever before. The reflection staring back at her was no longer a hollow woman weighed down by the expectation of others. It was a woman who had fought her way back to herself, who had overcome the cruelty of others, and most importantly, and who had learned to love and honor herself. And as she walked into the world each day, Samantha knew that she was no longer defined by anyone else's opinion. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her freedom. The silent battle had been long, but in the end, it was her to win. After Samantha made the difficult decision to leave James, her husband, and his family, the dynamics of her life and theirs shifted dramatically. James, initially shocked and resistant to her departure, struggled with the consequences of his action. He tried to convince her to come back, even suggesting therapy or couples counseling. But Samantha had already made up her mind. She realized that James wasn't the man she had once known and loved, but someone who had enabled a toxic environment both for her and her relationship. Over time, his attempts to rekindle their marriage turned into bitter arguments as he refused to acknowledge the depth of the emotional harm he has caused. Ultimately, their divorce was finalized and Samantha walked away from the marriage with a sense of both relief and sadness. She had hoped for a different outcome, but she knew that staying would only prolong the pain. James, left to grapple with the dissolution of his marriage, had to confront the stark reality of his behavior. While he never fully took responsibility for his roles in their breakdown, he did eventually seek therapy, if only to manage his own sense of guilt and the confusion. His relationship with his family remains strained as they had been instrumental in his dismissive treatment of Samantha. James found himself isolated, realizing that without the support of his wife, he was losing his sense of connection with others as well. In the years that followed, he worked on changing some of his habits, but the scars of his marriage to Samantha would never fully disappear. He never remarried, and often late at night, he would wonder if he had lost the best thing that had ever happened to him. As for his family, they didn't take kindly to Samantha's decision to leave. His mother, in particular, was furious. She had always seen Samantha as an extension of herself, and losing her as a daughter in law felt like a personal affront. She tried to reach out to Samantha using guilt and manipulations, but Samantha, strong in her newfound self respect, refused to engage. Over time, James' family tried to rebuild their relationship with him, but their interference continued to be a source of tension. Eventually, James distanced himself from his family, realizing that their constant undermining of his relationship had contributed to the collapse of his marriage. Samantha's journey, however, was one of the profound transformation. With time, she built a life of independence, surrounded by friends who valued her and supported her growth. She thrived in her career, traveled the world, and found joy in the little thing again. Most importantly, she learned to love herself again, something that had been lost during the years of emotional manipulation. Though the scars from her marriage never fully disappeared, Samantha's strength and resilience became her greatest asset. Her story became one of healing and renewal, a reminder that even after the deepest wound, one could rise again. In the end, Samantha's choice to step away from a life of emotional turmoil allowed her to reclaim her sense of self, while James and his family remained trapped in their own circle of blame and denial. Samantha had broken free not just from her marriage but from the shackle of others' expectations, and in doing so, had found the freedom to live a life that was entirely her own. Thank you so much for always listening. I hope you learned a lot from this story. Please do well to subscribe to this channel, share this video, and tell me what you think about it in the comment section. Please, if you find yourself in a place where you are not happy and you have prayed, you have done all you need to do, please, you can think about Samantha's story and help yourself. Thank you. I love you guys. Bye.